the lecture. It's 10 o'clock. And today's lecture is about metal alkyls. But I'm going to restrict myself to main group metal alkyls because they fall in a distinctly different category compared to the transition metal alkyls. Transition metal alkyls have distinctly different properties. We'll talk about them a little later. We're starting with alkyls because these are species which have got only one carbon attached to the metal, and this one carbon is attached to the metal through a sigma bond. Usually there are no complications with pi interactions. So these are probably the simplest that you can think of. But when you come to main group elements, as we shall see now, you can have some complicated structures. And I'll also explain why that comes about, why that is the case, and how you can understand these structures. So let's start with the synthesis of these molecules, which are fairly straightforward, but there are some 3 or 4 principles that one has to think about when you talk about the principles. So we will explain those principles also. Let me just take this call 1 second, please. Hello. Yeah, I know I have sent a message already. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 to 11, I have a class. Okay, so thank you. Sorry about the disturbance. Since it was a call from the director's office, I had to take it. There are 2 factors that need to be thought about. One is kinetics and the other thermodynamics. Let's talk about thermodynamics to start with. I will start with alkali metals, the main group elements, alkali metals, lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, cesium. They form the first alkali metal series, which need to be talked about. So let's talk about these elements. They have a configuration of ns1, which means there is only one electron in the s orbital, and so that can be very readily lost. As a metal, it has got low ionization potential and it can be lost. And once it is lost, you call it a cation, but if it can be covalently shared with another group, like an R group, then of course we have, if you have a carbon, then of course you have a metal alkyl, lithium alkyl. The simplest would be a methyl group. So lithium methyl, for example, would be a good starting point. And the total electron count we see around this metal alkyl is 2. If you remember what we talked about in terms of main group elements, a total octet, if an octet is to be attained, then you need a lot more electron donors around the lithium methyl. So that is the situation, and that is the reason why we have some problem and some complicated structures as far as lithium alkyls go, or alkali metal alkyls go. Now the question is kinetics. How easily or how fast will it be formed, and how reactive it is going to be? These 2 factors also have to be considered. Since we said that the metal is in fact very ready to lose its electron, we call it electropositivity. The electropositivity combined with the electronegativity of the carbon will lead to a situation where we have a polarized bond. So that's what I have in the bottom of this list, of this representation. So let me box it here. So this is one possible representation where you have a complete transfer of one electron from the metal to the R group. So you have M plus and R minus. This then allows you to describe the alkyl group as a 2-electron donor in the oxidation state method. The covalent bond classification method emphasizes the fact that it is completely shared, and 1 electron is given by the metal and 1 electron is given by the R group. So they are equally shared. So that's the neutral or the covalent bond classification method. So unlike species like electronegative species like halogens, these groups are going to be fairly covalent, especially when it comes to metals which are not so electronegative. You will have a reasonably covalent description. So the covalent bond classification is not a bad idea when it comes to species which are not very electropositive. Electropositivity increases with the size, so it's linearly correlated with the size. So as you go down the group, so here as you go down the group, you have more and more electropositivity, and that is easy to understand because it's easier to stabilize a positive charge on a very large cation. When you have a small species, then the charge is very localized, then it would be more electropositive. Another way to think of it is also to look at the screening of the outermost electron by the nucleus. So in the case of lithium, you have 3 protons which are shielded by the 1s2, and but when it comes to cesium, you have a whole bunch of electrons which are shielding the outermost electron. And so it will be very easy to release the electron from cesium. And so both in terms of the ease of releasing it from the atom and in terms of stabilizing the cation as a cation, the cesium is going to be very electropositive and it's going to be an ionic species, whereas lithium is going to be less electropositive, and so it would hold on to its electron, and the lithium carbon bond is likely to be covalent. So this is likely to be a covalent interaction, whereas the cesium is likely to have an ionic interaction. This is not very difficult to follow. The same thing follows for group 2 elements. Today I will talk about both. Group 2 and group 1 elements. And the same reactivity pattern holds good. The reactivity of these species then is more when it is ionic in nature. So this is also easy to see. The character of R as R minus is going to be greater when you have a very large cation. So R2M turns out to be more ionic when you have barium or strontium or calcium. Towards the end of this talk, I'm going to talk about some new calcium compounds that have been discovered. I won't say discovered, but they were recently made, and they have some interesting structures, and we'll take a look at them. So in this case also, you're going to have M linked to 2 R groups, and the total electron count is only coming up to 4 valence electrons. So you can accommodate 4 more valence electrons in order to have an octet. This is the reason why these molecules are very often found coordinated to other electron donors. So we'll come to that very shortly. Let's take a look at the other aspect, which is I talked about removing the electron from a metal atom, but if the electron has to be pushed into an organic fragment, an alkyl group is not a great species to hold 2 electrons. an sp3 orbital is not a great species to hold 2 electrons in a stable fashion. This is different, however, when you have very extended or very large pi systems. Like what I have on the screen is naphthalene, and naphthalene can accommodate another electron in its pi star orbitals. The pi star orbitals are not far up in energy compared to the HOMO. And so what happens is, if I use a potassium metal, I can push that 1 electron into the pi star orbital of the naphthalene, and that 1 electron is now delocalized in this whole pi system. Because it is delocalized, like I said, if you have a large atom or a molecule, the electron density or the lack thereof can be spread over this large area. And then what happens is the system becomes more stable. If the charge is concentrated, it's going to be more reactive. So naphthalene, for example, can stabilize that 1 electron in the pi star system. And this is very commonly used in the laboratory. You use naphthalene, for example, to act like an indicator. To act like an indicator when you're drying solvents, because the moment you have this species, which is actually known to be a 2 electron acceptor with a large amount of lithium, which is again stabilized by tetramethyl diamine, which is pictured here. This is popularly known as TMEDA, tetramethyl diamine. So these are all methyl groups. So this tetramethyl diamine stabilizes the lithium, and the electron is stabilized by the extended pi system. And this is having a typical blue color. So these blue or bluish green colors, which are formed when you have extended pi systems, are good indicators, because if you have water, the electron is rapidly quenched. And the electron is rapidly quenched and it becomes OH minus. Anantu, you have a question.
Yes, sir. In the case of using lithium on naphthalene, does it form a double anion? We have indicated 2 electrons on the 2 rings.
I'm sorry, I was not able to hear you very clearly. Can you repeat that question?
Sir, in the case of using lithium to dry DH.
Yes.
When you use this naphthalene as an indicator, here you have showed that there are 2 electrons on the 2 aromatic rings. Does it mean it forms double anion?
Yeah, it's a dianion. But that this is in fact the stuff that is used in the laboratory commonly as an indicator is the potassium salt. Okay, it's not the lithium salt. The lithium salt is blue in color and has been characterized. So I gave that as an example. But the potassium salt is what is used as an indicator in the lab.
Okay, sir, but can't potassium salt form a double anion just like lithium?
Sure, it can. It just depends on how much is there, and if lithium can form it, potassium can also form it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and discuss the electron count around the metal. Shubham, you have a question? Urgent question?
So you had said the electrons get quenched in water. So meaning the color disappears in the presence of water?
Yes, the color disappears. So that's why it's a good indicator of the presence of moisture. If water gets into the reaction medium or oxygen gets in, both of them are able to quench their excess electrons. Okay. So the species R2m and Rm, where there are vacant p orbitals, they can be occupied or they can be satisfied, so to speak, with extra electron donors. In the previous slide, I showed you how we can have TMEDA. Usually in the laboratory, people use THF. THF is again something that is used extensively. THF, tetrahydrofuran, which is pictured here. Tetrahydrofuran is a common ligand that is used to stabilize metal alkyls. So some of them, okay. So when you have better coordination and better stability, you will have poor reactivity, meaning the Rm or the R2M is less reactive when it is extremely stabilized. So the solvent and the ligand play a very important role in determining the reactivity of this metal alkyl species. So metal alkyl species are species which can be used for reactions, but then the reactivity is controlled by that extra pair of electrons that you are going to feed into the metal. Whenever you prepare a metal alkyl, you need some donor atom when you have alkaline or alkaline earths for this reason. Now, I have listed for you 4 different principles which we will encounter today. Hopefully, depending on the time constraints, we'll discuss 4 different methods. If I have Rx, meaning R halogen, then I can use a metal to reduce the species and convert it into Rm. So that's the first method. Here, what you find is the metal is in the 0 oxidation state to start with. And then when it goes here, the formal oxidation state has become +1. If it becomes R2M, then of course metal has become +2. So you have a redox reaction. So in this method, you have a redox reaction that is taking place when you talk about the preparative method. There are other methods which the other 3 methods do not involve a redox step. For example, if I add a metal plus M, which is already oxidized, I can remove an H plus from the RH. So you can have RH, and I can treat it with M plus, and I can still form an Rm and release an H plus minus H plus. So that would not involve a redox step. So that's what I mean by saying that there is no redox involved. There is also another method. You take a metal hydride, which is already in the +1 oxidation state, and then you add it to an alkene. And then you form a metal alkyl again. So these are these are steps where there is no redox step involved. So let's take a look at some of these one by one. Let me just a second. Let me just. Okay, so I have skipped some slides, but that is okay. So this is the direct reaction of a metal with an Rx group. You have an alkyl halide. Alkyl halides can of course be chloride, bromide, or iodide or fluoride. But the fact is, in this reaction, you are going to generate Rm. You're going to generate Rm, generate Mx. And the formation of Mx is a great driving force for pushing the reaction from right to left. So in this reaction step, if Mx has got a large stability, then this reaction is going to be thermodynamically favorable. Similarly, if I'm going to stabilize Rm with a ligand, then also I can push the reaction from right to left. If M equals, say, lithium, R can be any one of the alkyl groups. What we find is X being Br or iodine, this reaction works very well. Whereas when it is Cl, the reaction doesn't work very well. The reason for that is twofold. One is a kinetic reason, X going away as X minus Rx. You are breaking this bond, and this is going away as X minus. So the stability or the ease with which X goes as X minus is going to determine how easy it is going to push it away. The leaving group ability is basically what we are talking about. So if this X bond, Rx bond is very strong, it's not going to break. So Rf is the strongest bond and it doesn't break easily. And so even though F minus is very stable, breaking this CF bond is very difficult. And so it is usually Br or iodine, which is more easy to use in this reaction. I should also mention that Ri is probably the most convenient, but sometimes Ri can be unstable because it is photosensitive, because the Ri bond is so weak that the bond can be or rather the sigma star of Ri is so low that it can be unstable in solution and it can generate an R dot. So because of that reason, RBr turns out to be the favorite among chemists. RBr is usually used for making any one of the metal alkyl species. I said F is unthinkable, but I will discuss in a separate lecture. I will talk about how one can make how one can break the RF bond or even the RCl bond without using very drastic measures. Okay. Now I want to talk about the structures of these species a little bit, and the structures of all these molecules are found to be fairly complex. I told you that this is the main problem with metal alkyls. Even though it is coordinated with THF, in THF solvent or ether, methyl lithium turns out to be a tetramer. This tetrameric structure is in fact characterized both spectroscopically and using X-ray crystallography in some cases. And this can be described in two ways. What I'm going to do is to write for you, or draw for you rather, a cube. So this is the cube that I've drawn for you. And if you take this cube and put alternate corners, if you take alternate corners and place the lithium atom there, and then you can put the carbon in the other corners of the cube, this would be the structure of methyl lithium approximately. I'm saying approximately because the carbon cube and the carbon corners and the lithium corners are not equally separated. The carbon is further away from, and the lithiums are smaller and closer together. So it would be a distorted cube. It's better to think of it as two tetrahedra. One tetrahedra formed by lithium, another tetrahedra formed by carbon, and they are intermeshed, and this is the structure of the species. And of course, the lithium atom is coordinated with some other ligands also. In this case, it can be THF or ether. So if you remove this coordinating solvent and you solubilize it in a hydrocarbon, this requires a little bit of manipulation, it's a more difficult process. Then this is a hexamer. This turns out to be a hexamer. N-butyl lithium is similar to methyl lithium, but T-butyl lithium is almost always a tetramer. Benzyl lithium is a monomer in ether. That means there are 3 ether molecules which are coordinated to the lithium. The benzyl group. So many of these species have been structurally characterized, so we know for sure what is the structure of these molecules. And the reason, as I told you, because of electron deficiency around the lithium, you need some donor to stabilize it. If you do not have a donor, or if it is possible for it to share the electron density, it does that. And the sharing of electron density is what causes it to have this type of clusters. Some clusters are formed. Okay, so as I told you, some are expected structures. Like for example, this is diethyl magnesium with a cryptand. This is a cryptand which has stabilized the diethyl magnesium, and you have a nice almost octahedral geometry for the diethyl magnesium. So this would be a very, I should say, it's an extremely expected kind of structure. That's what you would expect for this molecule. You can also have a lot more complicated structure when I have this molecule is C6H42 minus. So you have 2 negative charges, which is now stabilized by a tetrahedron of magnesium atoms. So these 2 negative charges are stabilized by 4 magnesium cations, and these magnesium cations are stabilized by a further coordination of THF. Okay, so this is the situation that you have, and you can see that the carbon here is close to 2 different magnesiums on one side. This magnesium and this magnesium, both of them are close to this carbon. On the other hand, you have another carbon which is close to only this one magnesium. But this magnesium will have one more coordination from another THF. So the situation is reasonably complex, and I will talk about how, let me talk about now, how can you explain some of these complicated structures. The best way to think about these bridges is to think about 3-center 2-electron bonding. I'm sure if you have done a previous course on inorganic chemistry, you have learned about 3-center 2-electron bonding. 3-center 2-electron bonding is best explained in this fashion. I have put a metal p orbital, but this metal can be an s orbital, as in the case of a main group element. In the case of main group elements, you will have, of course, magnesium has got s and p, but if I have lithium, the separation between the s and the p is larger, but I can just picture it with an s or a p orbital. These are the metal atoms. These are the metal atoms. Now, these 2 metal atoms are interacting with only 1 orbital on the carbon. It's only interacting with 1 orbital on the carbon. So there are 3 sets of orbitals, or 3 molecular orbitals that you can form, and the energy levels are approximately in this fashion. So if I have 3 hydrogens, they would be exactly in an equilateral triangle in a sphere, circumscribing the hydrogen atoms. But if I have unequal orbitals, then it's not so simple to derive the energies, but I can have 2 electrons nicely stabilized in 3 orbitals. So this is the basis for having 3-center 2-electron bonding. Now the other alternative was to form CMM. This type of an interaction would be possible if I have two vacant orbitals or 2 filled orbitals on the carbon. Then I can have a electron precise bonding. So this is electron deficient or 3-center bonding, and this is electron precise bonding. So this does not happen in this case. For example, when I have multiple metal atoms interacting with the same carbon, I have electron deficiency and electron deficient bonding. That's why we very often have the situation where an additional ligand or a solvent is stabilizing the metal alkyl species. So let me go to one other method of making metal alkyl. Here I am starting with metal in a positive oxidation state. Ag is Ag2 plus right here. N-SiMe3 twice. This is a species which we will encounter often, which is Si with 3 methyl groups. And this third valency of nitrogen is occupied by the metal. So this group, bis trimethylsilylamide, is a very popular group, which is good because this N-SiMe3 twice and it's reasonably stable. So you can form metal salts with it like this. Now I have formed a metal salt with mercury. So Ag2 plus interacts with another molecule, another organic molecule, which has got a weak acidic hydrogen. You know that acetone has got an acidic hydrogen because it's the enolizable hydrogen that is present on the acetone. So this hydrogen leaves as H plus. So 2 H plus atoms are generated in this reaction, and this 2 H plus is grabbed up by the N-SiMe3. So this species takes up the hydrogen, and so you have bis trimethylsilylamine being formed. So it is the acidic nature of this molecule and the fact that you have added a metal in M plus state that has led to the formation of this mercury carbon bond. So mercury has a tendency to form metal carbon bonds fairly easily. Here I have done it with benzene itself, and benzene is not a very acidic compound, but still mercuric acetate, if you boil it with in benzene, you can catalyze the formation, or you can form a PHAgOAC with HOAC or acetic acid. This is simply acetic acid. This acetic acid is liberated in the reaction. You can understand this reaction as an electrophilic aromatic substitution also. Or all you have done is a GOAC plus attacking the benzene ring, which is very electron rich. So the electrophilic group of AgOAC plus has done electrophilic substitution on the benzene ring, leading to the formation of a nice metal or mercury carbon bond. So that is the second method that I told you about, where you can have active hydrogen atoms leaving the group. Now you can have one more method, and this is elimination of some molecules. For example, if I have an easily eliminatable or ejectable group like N2 or CO2, these are very stable molecules, nitrogen, dinitrogen, and carbon dioxide. So imagine a molecule like a metal salt, RCOOM. If I heat this species, I am able to remove this. Carbon dioxide and form an alkyl metal species. This method is known for mercury. It's known for some other metals also. I have not written it. It is known for zinc. And it is also known when you have a diazo salt. Here is a diazo salt. If it is treated with mercury, again, you can form aryl mercury bond easily. So these are reactions where you can eject sulfur dioxide also. I have not put down an example, but sulfur dioxide is another molecule which can be ejected from an organic species, which will then give you a metal carbon bond. So let's proceed further. The fourth method that I told you about is the method which where you have an already metal alkyl bond, and you can add this metal alkyl bond to another unsaturated species. Now, I have done something in this screen which I don't like myself, and that is to write a C triple bond C in a bent fashion. So this is written like that just to tell you that in the reactive state, it can be close to the metal, but please don't write alkynes with bent bonds. Okay, so I have kind of done some violence to organic chemistry here by writing these bent bonds, which I myself regret. Okay, so here is an alkyl bromide, and you treat it with lithium metal. And if usually the trick is if the lithium metal doesn't react very easily, you activate it by treating it with a little bit of iodine, and that lithium iodide is then washed away with diethyl ether, and the shiny lithium metal is reacted with this bromo compound. It forms a metal alkyl species. This metal alkyl species is now close to this carbon C triple bond C, not too far away, and it adds on to the C triple bond C to form this species. These are not single step reactions. It's not as if it happens by this magic movement of lithium directly from here. These are surely electron transfer processes, and we have not discussed them here, but we will discuss them later in the future when we have to talk about metal alkyls a little more. But these are stepwise processes which lead to a cyclic ring system. But what you have done is you've added a metal carbon bond. This lithium carbon bond has now been added across this triple bond, converting it into a double bond. So you formed a new metal carbon bond. So this type of interaction is also known, and it's very common for lithium. And here is another example, which I have chosen this because it illustrates a nice principle. If I have an R-Li group, the same, instead of a triple bond, I have now a double bond, but I can add it across the C double bond C. So these are the groups that have been added, and the two red bonds are the ones that I have added. This is the bond that I have broken. So this is basically addition, a nucleophilic addition that has been performed on an alkene. again, this is not going to happen so easily. We will talk about this a little more, but because this is a reasonably covalent, I don't think it happens in an ionic fashion, but it probably happens through a radical mediated pathway or a covalent interaction of the alkene being coordinated to this alkene being coordinated to the lithium. So this is probably how it happens, but the species that is formed, you'll notice that it has the possibility for forming a chiral species. So we can ask a question, can we somehow modify this group here with a chiral ligand and make this whole thing chiral? Is it possible? Is it possible to do that? And the answer is yes, and that's probably, that's the reason why I've chosen this. This has been done with a variety of species. There are some restrictions. There is an allyl group which is assisting the reaction, but if I have a ligand, a di-nitrogen donor ligand, which can coordinate very nicely to the lithium. This is a very good donor ligand, which is the two nitrogens are really pointed towards the metal atom so that it can donate good amount of electron density to the lithium. So this partene is a very good donor ligand, but it is also chiral, and so that can be used for adding a lithium alkyl to this prochiral olefin. This prochiral olefin can add on this R-Li, and of course I put it as R2-Li to distinguish it from the other R. So that R2 group adds on in this carbon, and the lithium or the negative charge ends up here. Okay. So the lithium ends up here. Now you'll notice that that's the most stable situation because that's next to a phenyl group. And the authors were able to show that you have a good amount of chirality as a result of having spartene as a ligand instead of simple tetramethyl diamine. You could have done the same reaction with tetramethyl diamine. But if you use spartene, then because the spartene is chiral, you are able to induce chirality in the product. In the final product, this carbon is now chiral, and you have carried out asymmetric synthesis. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to move to a different presentation. So please hold on for a second. I will just show you a different presentation. So so this is, I wanted to just introduce to you, get you into the habit of reading papers. This is supposed to be an advanced course in organometallic chemistry, so I want you to read papers and follow them carefully. And I also want to emphasize the fact that this was published fairly recently. You would think that dimethyl calcium, this is just Me2 dimethyl calcium. So this is just a simple molecule like this. Why are we going to discuss such a simple molecule? As I told you, all these species have got complicated structures, and none of them are easy to characterize because they're usually mixtures. All the lithium alkynes, for example, they are always in equilibrium with
Sir, are you sharing
like
your screen, sir?
Sorry?
Sir, are you sharing your screen?
Yes, yes, yes. I'm sorry. It has stopped sharing the screen. Sorry. Thank you for telling me. Okay, so we are talking about this dimethyl calcium, and as I told you, this has got a very complicated structure, but more importantly, it's not possible to isolate them in pure form. This is a difficulty that stops stops you the equilibrium between multiple species. If you have a mixture, they will not crystallize out. Crystals are formed only when you have reasonably pure compounds, or the stability of one of these crystals is very large compared to the other forms. Then you can precipitate out or crystallize out one of these compounds. So it was not possible to characterize dimethyl calcium for a very long time. And 2018, these researchers whom I have listed here, Benjamin Wolf and Christoph, etc., all these people finally made dimethyl calcium. So I just want to emphasize the fact that it is fairly recent. Now, to make dimethyl calcium, you can just simply treat it with calcium and RX, which is any alkyl halide. But as I told you, this RCAX is in equilibrium with CaX2 and CaR3. If CaX2 is reasonably stable in this reaction medium, this one is reasonably stable, or soluble, sorry, I should say soluble in the reaction mixture. This equilibrium results in three different compounds being present. 1, 2, 3. 3 calcium containing compounds being present. Okay. So as a result, not to mention RX, which might be the unreacted part. So it's very difficult to carry out these reactions and get pure amounts of CaR2. That's what these people accomplished, and they accomplished it using a trick. So I told you that we'll encounter this molecule again. This is lithium salt of the bis trimethylsilyl amide now. Okay. Now, so what did they do? They actually prepared this calcium salt of bis trimethylsilyl amide and then treated it with methyl lithium. If you do that, you get CaMe2. But this CaMe2 is some value of unknown value of N. Okay. What they have mentioned in the paper is CaMe2 is CaMe2N. And plus, because of this reaction, you're adding methyl lithium to it, there are varying amounts of lithium chloride, diethyl ether, everything in the reaction mixture. And so this becomes a horrible mixture to separate, and you cannot get high purity of this calcium dimethyl species. So they did a lot of manipulations. They did multiple steps, and many involve transmetallation. Methyl lithium is the one, first of all, they established that methyl lithium was a source of impurity, which was bringing in the lithium chloride. Okay. So, because methyl lithium is prepared with methyl chloride and lithium. And even then, all the lithium chloride does not precipitate out, and you end up with small amounts of lithium chloride, which is again carried over into the next step. So, what they did was the following. Okay, they took a mercury salt, and the mercury salt was treated with lithium metal. And this is now in equilibrium with mercury and 2R So this is guaranteed that it is a metathesis reaction, and it is an equilibrium reaction. But because mercury separates out from the reaction mixture, you are able to make good quantities of RLi in pure form. And this RLi in pure form, now you can use it for further reactions. And there are other ways of doing it also, but they used this method. And what they have done is, in order to avoid AgMe2, this is to avoid AgMe2, they used this particular method and generated RLi, methyl lithium, in pure form. Why did they avoid AgMe2? AgMe2 turns out to be a very bad poison. I do not have time to discuss this today, but I will upload a video where I will talk about this in a short presentation, which you will be able to download and listen to. This is because I'm not able to cover as much as I would like to in a regular class presentation. So I'm going to use that method to convey some side topics which I would have otherwise covered. So AgMe2 is a very bad poison, so they had to avoid it. A very famous researcher died, or a very famous death occurred about 15 years ago, about 10 years ago in the US. A person called Wetterham in MIT. So that is the reason they avoided AgMe2. Now, let me tell you what they did. They prepared this calcium salt, and they prepared this methyl lithium in various methods. And the method that using the mercury method was the best method, and they were able to prepare very pure calcium, dimethyl calcium. Now, if they use this method, they get impure mixtures. If they use the mercury method, then they prepare very pure, high purity species. So, the reaction itself is fairly straightforward. They are all metathesis reactions, like AB plus CD giving AC plus BD. There are no big magic. It's based on electronegativity principles and pushing the reaction from one side to the other side using thermodynamic principles. So here are the species which they isolated. I want to tell you that just varying the solvent and the temperature at which the reaction was done, they got so many different molecules. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, which they could characterize in a pure form, which they could characterize crystallographically. The simplest, of course, is dimethyl calcium without too many other ligands. Okay, and this is the species which is here, which is labeled as 2. That has got 7 calciums and 14 methyl groups. 7 calciums and 14 methyl groups. And this is a simple dimer. Again, 2 methyl groups, but it still has iodide in it. Okay, it still has iodide in it. But this is CaMe2 with THF. Here's another molecule which has got methyl groups and iodine in it, coordinated to it. It's got another strange structure, what I have on the right top of the screen. So if you add a ketone, you undergo a methyl, calcium methyl bond is broken, and the ketone is adding in a Grignard type reaction. You have such molecules. But pretty much all these molecules could be characterized only because of this transmetallation reaction. Okay, in the remaining 5 minutes, I want to quickly tell you one more recent paper that was published by Bergman. Bergman is another very famous organometallic chemist who has contributed significantly to reaction mechanisms. Not too long ago, maybe about 10 years ago, this molecule, which is pictured on the right side of your screen, that molecule with a zinc-zinc bond, was characterized. What they have done recently is to prepare 4 metal atoms, one after the other, in a linear fashion, coordinated in a linear fashion. So this is almost like a metal wire that is present. And the other interesting thing is, of course, that zinc is, even if you consider the metal as a negative species, the zinc is in +1 oxidation state. Yes. Zinc-zinc bond. It's got a zinc-zinc bond. Okay. So let's proceed. How did they do it? Here is a molecule. These molecules are reasonably more complex, but I presume you will be able to follow it. This is a cyclopentadienyl group, which is bonded to the rhenium, and an amidate group. Okay, this is an amidate group, which is again stabilized because of conjugation. This is the anion that we are talking about. There are 2 methyl groups here. And this anion is able to stabilize, or reasonably, it's able to be a stable molecule or a fragment because of the extended conjugation. And this is now coordinated to the rhenium. The AR groups are also rather large. 2 isopropyl groups are there on either side. And you have this species which has got a counter ion which is trichloro stannate. Okay, so you reduce it with excess sodium, you generate a species which is now here on this side. I have an O2 minus, I have an amidate which is L minus, 1 negative charge, and then Cp minus. So you have total of 4 minus charges, and still you have a plus charge. So rhenium is in the +5 oxidation state. Here it has come down to +1 oxidation state. Why do I say that? Because I have 2 negatively charged species on either side, and I have an extra negative charge outside. So rhenium must be in the +1 oxidation state. So, and of course, you need excess of sodium to do all the reduction. I'm sorry, again getting a call from the director's office. So this is what they have done. Now, this will not take too much time. I have pictured for you 2 reactions. One is silver. Silver is in silver plus, and this is a protonation reaction. Both of them seem to give very good yields of product. So this is a hidden proton, H plus, and here you have Ag plus, which is accepting an electron. So you now have rhenium in +2 oxidation state. You have oxidized the rhenium by reducing the silver to silver 0 and you have gone from +1 to +2 here. +1 to +2. So you oxidize the rhenium. So it is capable of doing redox reactions. And what they did was treat it with zinc chloride and obtain a molecule which had rhenium, zinc, rhenium. So you have a molecular wire being formed. So I will send you these slides. I have to hurry through this, but I think I have to stop here right now because it's 11 o'clock. What we have seen is that we can make metal alkyls, and these metal alkyls can be converted to some very interesting compounds, very different structures, and it is a topic of current interest, and you will be able to read more interesting stuff in the literature as well, as I have just illustrated for you from this rhenium zinc species, which I have pictured on the slide. So we'll stop here, and I will accept some questions, and then I'll also post some videos before we go to the next class on Monday. Questions? If there are no questions, I will have to stop the recording. Okay, so I presume you're able to follow this fairly easily, and in the next class we'll talk about group 3 and group 4 elements, where you have R3M groups and R4M groups. Arco?
Sir, in case of Me2Ca, are these two-centered two-electron bonds, the CMe bond, the CaMe bond? Like,
are they? What is the question?
Are the calcium methyl bonds two-centered two-electron bonds in CMe2?
Yeah, there are so multiple bonds in that case. So let's take an example of. Let's take this example, which is there. No, many of them seem to be coordinatively saturated, but the carbon.
Sir, you haven't shared your screen.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. The carbon. So the carbon that has got 3-center 2-electron bonding. Okay. So yeah, carbon, calcium bond. Let me put a red. Let me put a red. I'm talking about this. Not all the bonds are 3-center 2-electron bonds. This methyl group has got a 3-center 2-electron bonding with the 2 calciums. Okay. So you can check out which is a 3-center 2-electron. This is another methyl group which has got 3-center 2-electron bonding. So there are some situations where there are 3-center 2-electron bonding, some situations where there are electron precise bonding. This is electron precise bonding. This is electron precise bonding. Okay. This is again 3-center 2-electron bonding here. So you can you will have to look at each situation and then decide whether here there is no 3-center 2-electron bonding in this case. Electron precise bonding. Okay. Any other question?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in the same molecule, there are also some methyls which are bonded to 3 calcium atoms.
Which molecule you're talking about?
CaMe2, sir. The one you have shown.
Number 2.
Yes, CaMe2. Calcium. Yeah, number 2. Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. What are you saying?
There are some methyls which are bonded to 3 calciums at a time. Which are on the trigonal pyramids, like methyl and methyl.
Yeah, I said that there are electron deficient bonding, but not all these structures that I have on the screen have uniformly 3-center 2-electron bonding. There are some structures which seem to be electron precise. That's why I said I should not make a generalized statement. Okay. Did I answer that question, or what was your question?
Sir, actually, 3-centered 2-electron bonds is quite possible, but how can a methyl molecule, I mean, methyl moiety bind to 3 calciums at a time? Because
exactly, that's what I was. Oh, 3 is perfectly fine. What you, yeah, I drew the molecular orbital picture for 2 calciums, right? Similarly, if I have 3 calciums, the 3 calcium atoms will have. Let me picture it as, so this would be the lowest bonding or lowest molecular orbital formed by 3 calciums. Similarly, you would have another set like this and another set like this with no contribution from the 3rd calcium. And the methyl group is, in fact, I will show it in a different color. Methyl group will have to come in as a single sp3 orbital, which is pointed towards this center of these 3 atoms. Okay, so it would have only interaction with this unit. It will not have interaction with these units. So that's why it forms a bonding combination with this. So I will discuss this in a little more detail, but it is possible to have 3-center. This is be 4-center 4-center 2-electron interaction.
Okay.
Okay. It's possible. It's not a impossibility. The only situation is that they are unequally. They not degenerate orbitals. When you talk about 3 hydrogens, you can easily derive the energies of the molecular orbitals. But with 4 atoms, it's difficult to derive the energies. But 4-center 3-electron bonds, 4-center 2-electron bonds are possible. Okay. So we will stop here. I will leave the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.